on to Binghamton, where it's homecoming night versus Ithaca. Senior quarterback Derek Abu Jr. would keep the celebration going on fourth down as he take the long run all the way to the end zone. This puts his team up 14-12. Little Red not going away, though. Sophomore Edward Peck keeping his legs going through the first down and dragging a couple of Patriots with him. His team would capitalize for the efforts. Freshman Jasmine Robbins through the hole. This puts his team back up by 5 in the third quarter. Binghamton keeping the momentum going, though, and trying on defense. Multiple Ithaca defenders stopping that. Patriots, though, come back and get the win. Binghamton gets the win 20-19 on homecoming.